How do we define moderate intensity, right? You're like, okay, heart rate, Dr. Black, I'm like, that's great. But like my heart rate right now is 85 beats per minute. Is that moderate? Is that light? What am I doing? How do we interpret that? We're going to get into those things, okay? Y'all are on the right track, though. You're on the right track. At this point in our major, you guys are doing pretty well with sort of how we train, okay? With how we train. The big deal we're going to emphasize, though, is once we've done that training, what's going to change? If we all concede that in the majority of people, your training makes your VO2 max go up, we need to understand then what's the physiology, what structures, what functions, all of that stuff we've talked about in class up until now. What's going to actually change to allow our VO2 max to go up? We put this section at this point in the semester because there's going to be lots of changes in the metabolic system, lots of changes in the cardiovascular system, not really much in the pulmonary system because it sucks, but a lot of things that are going on there, a few things in the muscles, okay, and that's going to drive our increase in VO2 max. As I told one group, it's pretty simple. You're going to say, what changes? Anything that contributes to the thick equation can change or will change. Okay? Some of you guys said stroke volume. One group said stroke volume goes up, Dr. Black. That's how VO2 max goes up. And I said, how? Why? And we kind of had to go around and I said, just say the thick equation, right? If max stroke volume goes up, VO2 max, it's algebra, it has to go up. Okay? Can't make your max heart rate go up. I wish you could, right? But if it can go up, max VO2 can go up. So we're going to get into some of that. And then we're going to finish a little bit at the end. We'll talk kind of briefly about what's the stimulus, okay? We have not arrived at 3 to 5 days a week of moderate intensity, get you X amount, just out of thin air, okay? Out of thin air. There's data that supports that intensity, that number of days, et cetera, okay? There's additional data that, well, what if I don't do that? What if I do 90% of my max, okay? How does that shift the equation? Is it better? Is it worse? Can I go for a longer time or a shorter time? We'll talk about what the actual stimulus is. What's happening during one bout that's going to then drive those changes that go on. Okay? We'll talk about that. Okay. Let me figure out now how we go to the next slide. Anybody have any ideas on how we do that? No?
On the next slide.
Yeah.
You should just be able to click.
That do I? Nope. So we're on one slide. How do we go to the next? I'm swiping. Ooh, wait, there we go. Okay. Got to be smarter than the computer. Okay. I don't want to tell you guys why you train. Okay? You all, if you do train, have your own reasons. Okay? We're not here to judge what's good or bad or better or worse or why. Okay? But most people train to improve their fitness in some ways, right? Running sucks, if you ask me. I'm not going to do it unless I think I'm getting something out of it, okay? Most people train to increase exercise performance, to increase their fitness, okay? That can be VO2 max, right? How long it takes you to run a mile, can you run a half marathon, whatever that might be, okay? They want their performance in a particular aerobically driven event to increase. Additionally, or in some instances alternatively, people train to be healthy, okay? People train to be healthy, whatever we think that means, okay? whatever Instagram world we want to live in about what is healthy, right? Of all of the things, okay? Of all of the things that we have some level of control over in our lives, if you want to be healthier, go run. Go run. Who cares what kind of seed oils you're eating or not eating, or this diet or that diet, or anything else? The single largest predictor, okay, of cardiovascular disease and of sort of longevity in life is your VO2 max. People with a higher VO2 max live longer and they have a higher quality of life while they are alive. Period. End of discussion. Okay? VO2 max trumps everything else. Right? Drinking water that has this certain pH in it. All the other bullshit that we see on Instagram and TikTok and everything else, it's all really simple. If you want to be healthy, the TikTok is, I'm going for a run. I know it sucks. Come on, let's go. That's it. Right? It's hard. I don't do it, but that's the honest answer. Okay? If you want to be healthier, run, bike, walk, whatever it is, do something to improve your VO2 max. Okay? That's the single biggest thing that we can do. Okay? So, much like with resistance training, okay? In order to understand how we should train and why certain adaptations take place, we need to understand what is it that limits exercise performance when we are doing aerobic exercise, okay? And it's the same thing that limits resistance training. It's fatigue, all right? At some point, I'm running, or I'm biking, or I'm elliptically, whatever it is, and I get fatigued and I decide to stop, okay? Fatigue limits performance. So, think of the things that cause fatigue then, all right? Primarily hydrogen ions, okay? We're over lactate threshold, we change pH, we get hydrogen ions, my legs burn when I'm doing that exercise, I feel uncomfortable, it's beginning to inhibit force production, it's inhibiting metabolism, right? Stop. I've got to stop. Secondarily, there is substrate depletion, right? Glycogen depletion, depletion of blood glucose, depletion of creatine phosphate. Those things are going to fall again into central and peripheral fatigue mechanisms. And there might be an inability, right, to deliver enough glucose or deliver enough fat metabolically to our muscles. Okay? Those first ones are much more likely than the third. So those are the things that cause fatigue, right? Just like with resistance training, we need to, in essence, exercise ourselves to the point of fatigue so that those things build up and we have to stop. But then that drives or stimulates changes in the metabolic system, changes in the cardiovascular system to prevent that from happening the next time and the time after that. Okay? Does that make sense, guys? Right? If you are relatively fit, which you guys are, me less so, right? Going for a slow walk on campus is not going to make you more fit. Okay? That's not going to improve your VO2 max because there's no fatigue. Okay? If you're really unfit like me, which I have to go to see my physician tomorrow, and she's going to tell me that I am not fit enough. And I'm going to feel bad about myself. We're going to talk about that in therapy today, I assure you, with all of that, okay? But if I was to walk briskly, I might actually be able to increase my VO2 max because I would get fatigued. But when you're more fit, you got to do more. You got to go faster, you got to go longer, however that's going to work, okay? That doesn't mean that slow walk doesn't have some health benefits. It doesn't mean burning those calories, taxing the cardiovascular system, some, being physically active is good. It is, but it's not enough to drive an increase in VO2 max. Okay? And at some point, increasing VO2 max, or at least maintaining it as you age, is the driver of, right, decreasing mortality rates, is the driver of having improved quality of life. Okay? So, we're going to break these changes down into what happens in the muscle, what happens in the metabolic system, what happens in the cardiovascular system, what happens in the pulmonary system, not a lot. They're going to be there. And some of these things are going to all interact together, but the changes will drive metabolic changes that mean we make less lactic acid, or we're better at clearing, okay, or buffering, less substrate depletion, okay? And we'll kind of dig into how all of that works. All right? Okay. So I mentioned this a little bit just a second ago, but just like with resistance training, we're going to talk about adaptations occurring because of two training principles. Okay? Two principles. Overload and specificity. Okay? Somebody tell me, what does it mean to overload?
Push your body past what it's normally doing.
Push it past what it's normally able to do, right? Walking slowly for you guys may not get any overload, right? If it's easy, make it harder. If you can do 10 minutes, do 12, right? If you can get on the treadmill, why anybody wants to get on the treadmill, I don't understand, right? It's the most boring thing in the world, but if you can run at 8 miles an hour, run at 8.2, okay? Overloads, the same thing with resistance training. If it's easy, do more, okay? We need that, and then specificity. And this is a hard one to understand as it relates to aerobic training. Okay, my dad, who is a very bright guy, still has a hard time with all of this. But just like with resistance training, when we get adaptations, they're going to occur in muscles that we use during training. So if you run, right, quads, glutes, probably not the hamstrings too much, gastroc soleus, TA, right, the muscles we're using to do that exercise are going to get the adaptations. You're not going to get a lot of changes in mitochondria and capillaries and things in your arms from running, or especially from biking, okay? But there also is going to be some central changes, right, in the cardiovascular system and things like that, that are not going to be specific to a given muscle, that are going to be specific to what is happening to the cardiovascular system during a bout of exercise. You can get central changes from arm cranking, or I don't know, doing repeated handstand push-ups, whatever it is, something else that makes heart rate go up, that makes, right, the cardiovascular system work harder. You're going to get adaptations there. How do we overload your system with aerobic exercise? Okay. From an aerobic standpoint, I'm going to present this idea as work. Okay. This is not muscular. I mean, it is muscular work, but it's not the biomechanical definition of work. It's not force times distance. But what it really is, some people will call it volume or someone else, but it's basically the intensity, the metabolic intensity of the exercise, multiplied by the duration of the exercise, multiplied by the frequency of the exercise, right? You guys did all of this intuitively when you wrote your things out, right? This is the FIT principle. Frequency, intensity, time, type. We're getting the frequency, intensity, and time portion. Type we can add. So if I want to overload your aerobic sort of systems, we can make it more intense metabolically. So go faster, or go up a hill, or something like that, okay? We can increase the duration. So do 20 minutes instead of 15. Or we can increase the frequency. You've been doing 3 days a week, do the same thing, but do 4. or do 5. Okay? And it's beyond the scope of this class for us to talk in some ways about the nuance of how do we manipulate all of those things in a somewhat logical manner as you plan out over, say, 6, 8, 12 weeks of training, right? You probably don't, if you're not doing things, want to increase the intensity and the duration and the frequency all in the same week, right? You can, but you may not feel great if you do those things, okay? More work leads to more fatigue. More fatigue means we're going to drive more adaptations in all of our systems to try to limit that fatigue going forward. Are y'all with me on that? I feel like our energy is dipping. Do we need to do some squats and induce some fatigue and try to get some adaptations on all of this? No? Okay. Don't threaten me with a good time. All right. Of these things, if you have to pick, okay? If you have to pick, and it's going to vary based upon, kind of what your trained population is. Of the things that matter the most, of the things that are the most important for driving fatigue and adaptations, intensity is unquestionably the most important. Okay? It's unquestionably the most important. And it's probably also the thing that people don't like to change the most, right? Because it stinks. When the intensity is higher, the metabolic cost is higher, right? The cardiovascular system has to work harder. And as that happens, the exercise is not particularly pleasant, right? It's not fun, it's not pleasant. I mean, some of you guys may think it's fun, and I don't really know what's wrong with y'all. But that's the thing. For most people, we need to be over 50% of VO2 max in order to have a chance to stimulate an increase in their VO2 max as we train. Okay? That's why kind of a nice, easy walk around campus shouldn't be at 50% of most of y'all's max. Okay? It might mean something, but for most people, it's not. Okay? For most of us, we need, the recommendation is 60 to 80% of VO2 max. So here's a fun fact. Show of hands. How many of you in here know your VO2 max? One person? Actually, how do you know your VO2 max?
Because my Garmin.
Because your what?
My Garmin, my watch.
Your Garmin told you.
Yeah, so it's probably not 100% accurate.
Okay. Anybody do a VO2 max test in testing prescription or exercise testing lab? You guys done one? You've seen one done, right? Okay. Madison's watch will tell her, will estimate what it is. That's good, right? It's better than nothing. But if the rest of y'all don't know your VO2 max, how on earth can you judge when you go do something today if you're at 50% of your max, or 80% of your max, or 10% of your max? How do we know? I can feel it. Okay, I mean we sort of chuckle, and that, Miles is not wrong in some ways, right? You're not wrong. Miles, what does it feel like to be at 80% of your VO2 max? Okay? Seems very reasonable with my experience as well, okay? Right? But how would you know if you were at 75% or 80% based upon that? Would it be a little more difficult? Okay? So how do we know?
Heart rate.
Heart rate. Sure. Okay? Heart rate. You guys remember, heart rate is going to increase very linearly with increase in oxygen consumption, right? Heart rate tracks with metabolism really, really well. So how do we know if I want to be at 60% of VO2 max, how would I know what my heart rate needs to be? You're going to go run right now. You got your watch on, you're like, all right, I need to know that it needs to be at X number. I want to be at 60% of my VO2 max. How do we decide what that number is? Just gonna feel it, just gonna wing it, just be like, I don't know, it's here, right? What do we do? I know you guys have had this, because I made the freaking slides with the tar, and I assume they're still using them because everybody's lazy. Nobody wants to make new slides. I know you covered in the health and fitness. I know if you've had personal training or endurance training or something else that you've covered it. I'm pretty sure for the three of y'all that are in Ms. Tallbear's obesity and weight management class, she talked about it yesterday. So what do we do? Don't make me call on you. I will do it. What do we do?
You find like your sub-maximal VO2 and go from there.
Find my sub-maximal VO2 and go from there. It's an interesting idea, but that's probably not exactly what we're looking for. I don't really know, knowing our sub-maximal VO2, like, we still need to know, we need to know a heart rate, right? We would go at. So how would you go about that? Miles?
You do like the age heart rate equation. Use the 8% of that.
Age predicted heart rate equation, and you do 80% of that, okay? So you need 80% of your age predicted max heart rate to be at what? Or I'm sorry, you just said age. So if I want to be at 60% of VO2 max, you think if I'm at 60% of my age predicted max heart rate, that's going to get me close? I'll just wait. We got time.
You figure out what your heart rate max is by doing the 220 minus your age and then calculate it from there. So if you're trying to figure out 70%, then you times that over by 7.
Okay. What Madison suggested is the old way of doing those things. Okay. And it's better than nothing. But that way, especially in you guys, rather dramatically underestimates the intensity that you need to be at. Okay? Do you guys remember calculating heart rate reserve? Some people are looking at me like, no, I don't know what that is. Okay, we'll come back to that then. That's fine. We'll come back to how we manage that, okay? I worry now when you guys go to exercise today that you're not working hard enough on all of this. Okay. Of our things, probably the second most important thing to change is going to be duration. And I'm going to say something that I want to make very, 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 very clear about the distinction that I'm making, because it's really important. Okay? Evidence tells us that if to increase VO2 max, only to increase VO2 max, only to increase VO2 max, that doing more than about 40 minutes of exercise, you get after 40, you get no further increase in VO2 max. Okay? I did not say you shouldn't run or bike longer than 40 minutes. But once you clear 40 minutes, any adaptations you get are not necessarily going to be further increases in VO2 max. Okay? So, I implore all of you that physiologically, you can make your VO2 max go up and get it to a certain place. But if you want to run a marathon, you've never actually ever run more than 40 minutes at a time, it's going to not end very well for you. Okay? So there's plenty of reasons to go longer than that. There are other adaptations that take place just like this. Okay? The same thing, we see a plateau and an increase in VO2 max at about 5 days per week as well. Okay? So, from a purely VO2 max standpoint, there's no need to exercise more than about 40 minutes at a time, nor more than about 5 days per week. Okay? Rest is important. We'll get a little more into that on Friday and next week, but that's kind of what we know about what the stimulus is. Okay? If you're in that range, 3 to 5 days per week, right? 20 to 40 or 45 minutes at a time, in that 60 to 80% of VO2 max range, then we're going to capture, in most people, most of our chances to increase VO2 max. Okay? Now, just like with resistance training, we have to progressively overload. So as you train and things improve, whatever pace you were running at or whatever you were doing is going to get easier, and you got to make it harder again. Okay. So that's where the ACSM guidelines, that's where whatever sort of personal training or training book you're going to look at, that's where those numbers have come from. There's science behind all of that, and it's primarily related to what do we need to make VO2 max go up. Okay? So we need to overload. We do that by being somewhere between 50 and 100% of VO2 max, 3 to 5 days per week, 20 to 40 or 45-ish minutes at a pop, and you're going to be right in that area to capture most of those things. Okay? As we increase total work, right, we get more fit. As we get more fit, we then have to increase work even more. Okay? And the easiest way to progressively continue to overload is to just readjust your running pace or your biking power output. You can keep the same 3 to 5 days per week. You can keep the same 20 to 45 minutes. Just as your VO2 max goes up, make sure that you're increasing pace or power output to correspond to that increase so that you're always at whatever that 60 to 80% of VO2 max. Okay? And that's the idea of what most people miss. It's hard. I get more fit, it becomes easy, and we just keep doing the same things over and over again, and then we stop adapting. Okay? And we stop adapting. Does that part make sense, guys? Okay. So we'll get into some of the actual adaptations now. I'll introduce a little bit of this, and then we'll turn you guys loose. Okay? So we're going to group adaptations into sort of where their location is and what physiological system is going to be affected. We're going to start off with talking about sort of muscle metabolism changes. So they're in the muscle, okay? In those muscles that we're using, and it's going to deal with certain the metabolic machinery that we had spent so long talking about. Okay? So keep in mind these questions, right? What would need to change in the metabolic systems to prevent fatigue? We need to prevent the accumulation of lactic acid. We need to prevent using blood glucose and depleting muscle glycogen. Okay? So adaptations that lead to those changes are the most likely ones to occur. So in that context, if you look at glycolytic metabolism, or you look at anaerobic metabolism, running does almost none, biking, basically no changes in the creatine phosphate system. No changes in the amount of stored ATP we have. There's very little other than kind of a dramatic increase in hexokinase. There's almost no changes in sort of glycolysis itself, okay? Our ability to get from glucose to pyruvate. Okay? Hexokinase goes up, so we get better at trapping the glucose coming in from the bloodstream in our muscle cells, but it doesn't change anything else in glycolysis appreciably. Okay? So, what that tells us then is that the vast majority of our adaptations are in aerobic metabolism. It's in the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain and the enzymes and the structures that support those things. Okay? And this probably is a good place to say for us to stop for today. I think we'll have the test for you guys on Friday. Okay? We'll do test, give back, and then we'll continue with all of this. Okay? All right, y'all have a good day.